Good afternoon, everyone. I am Ishay Collins, and I serve as the Director of the Equity Assistance Center South here at the Southern Education Foundation. And welcome to the final installment of our six-part webinar series on Educational Justice Learning Series. Today, we will discuss collaborating with families. Joining us is Danielle Thomas with the Center for Black Educator Development. Before we begin, I would like to provide a little more information about the Equity Assistance Center South. We are one of the 4 Equity Assistance Centers in the nation funded by the United States Department of Education, which serves our public education systems by addressing issues of equity. We advise, assist, and serve public schools and districts in their work to provide more equitable opportunities for students in the areas of race, national origin, sex, and religion. We serve Region 2, which supports 11 states: Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, Texas, Tennessee, Virginia, and the District of Columbia. We provide a range of technical assistance and trainings to school districts and agencies at no cost. And we would love to work with you closely, and we'll share our contact information at the end of today's presentation and in the chat. And so now I will turn it over to Ms. Thomas, who will facilitate today's session.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ishay. Thank you so much for that. And hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session, Collaborating with Families. I am very happy to be here with you all. Before we go ahead and get started, I just kind of want to run through our agenda. So we're going to take some time to define archetypes. We're going to identify our archetypes and where they come from. We're going to explore how our beliefs about families impact how we interact with them. And we're going to examine the family engagement continuum and strategies to build relationships with families. And so before we do that, I would like us to get started in a different way if you've ever joined us before for these sessions. And so starting with involvement, because we are going to be taking a look at a continuum today, I'd like us to take this introduction period of time before the session for you all to place yourselves on the continuum below where you think your practice or your educational ecosystem most consistently operates. And so we're going to be kind of diving in on what it looks like to engage and collaborate with families and looking at some strategies. But because we're going to take a look at this continuum again, I'd like us to take the moment to do that now. So where would you place yourself, your own practice, or your educational ecosystem most consistently on the continuum in regards to operation? And after you place yourself on the continuum, what evidence do you have to support your placement? So take about 30 more seconds. Please feel free to jot down your reflection or drop it in the chat if you'd like to. Okay. So thank you for sharing your placement. Given that we are going to be thinking about our service to families this afternoon, I wanted us to take a moment to consider all of the many families that we are connected to and what comes to mind about our practice overall with them. And so please hold on to your reflection. We are definitely going to come back to this later on in our session. And so you may have seen this before, hopefully, if you've joined us in our sessions, but at the center, we ground all of our work in cultural proficiency. And so this is the cultural proficiency continuum, and it's going to describe the ways people see and respond to cultural difference. Our goal and mindset and in action is to always operate at this right end of the continuum. Educators who function on this part of the continuum develop a keen awareness of and ability to respond to the values and behaviors that emanate from the left side of the continuum. And so, in its simplest form, cultural proficiency is the ability to meet the needs of any student from any cultural background. And for today's session, we're going to be thinking about that through the lens and avenue of identifying ways that we can increase our collaboration and our engagement with families. And so when we think about our families, I'm sure that many of us recognize and have experienced some barriers when trying to engage our families. Barriers to engagement are factors that can create challenges for families to interact with or become involved with their child's school. Take a moment to digest some of this information presented in this graph. And so a research team that develops the Panorama Family School Relationship Survey identified top barriers to engagement through a rigorous survey design process that included an extensive literature review, focus groups, expert reviews, and cognitive pre-testing with survey participants. And so the team looked at data from the Family School Relationship Survey, which included responses from over 18,000 parents and guardians from diverse school communities across the country. Specifically, they asked family members to respond to the following question. How big of a problem are the following issues for becoming involved with your child's current school? And as you can see, the most common barrier to engagement for these parents and guardians was a lack of time, with 54% of parents and guardians reporting that their busy schedule was a medium to very large problem for becoming involved with their child's school. And so this is not just a busy schedule in that, oh, like I need to go to Target or just run additional errands. A lot of the busy schedule was because of work time that they couldn't take off or having to balance having other family members to take care of or other responsibilities related to their family. Other top barriers to engagement include childcare needs, a perception that guardians and parents felt like school staff seemed a bit too busy, and that the school didn't provide very much information about involvement opportunities for families. About 1/5 of family members worry that the adults of the school would treat their children or child differently if they raised a concern. But the two most common barriers to engagement reported by families are largely, out of the control of school leaders and teachers. And so, as I shared, this survey was given to parents and guardians. And outside of this survey, many educators, myself included, have been on the other end of trying to collaborate with families when we consider, how we've been trying to engage them. And so when we think about some of these challenges and the barriers that are true for, collaborating with families, time constraints, as you saw in the survey, is really, really big. And so as I shared, the work commitments, multiple jobs, or other responsibilities make it really, really challenging for a lot of families to engage actively with the schools, okay? And so this isn't, a trivial type thing, like they don't want to, but they can't because of those responsibilities. a lack of resources. And so a lot of families may not have access to transportation, or they may not have internet access. And so this can also hinder their participation in school events or accessing information. When it comes to the culture of schools, right? A school's culture and policies can either be ones that promote or hinder family engagement. And also, not having accurate contact information for parents and guardians greatly impact educators' ability to provide important services and information to families. Additionally, a few other challenges and barriers to collaborating with families would be some of the negative experiences that families have had with schools and with the education system in the past, such as maybe feeling unheard or disrespected. This may cause people or families to be reluctant to engaging with schools, and sometimes schools don't always make families feel welcomed. When we're considering, the limited knowledge about school policies and procedures that are available, and the resources that are available, that could hinder family involvement. There are disparities in educational opportunities and other outcomes that could contribute to disengagement of marginalized families. There are language barriers and cultural differences that can impede upon effective communication and understanding between families and schools. And lastly, as you can see here, insufficient communication channels and ineffective methods of reaching out to families can also hinder engagement. And so these are all challenges that are very, very real, okay, for our families. And when we're thinking about district personnel and school staff and educators, it's our job to kind of figure out, okay, well, even if some of these things are true, what are the other things that we could do to really collaborate with our families? And so all of these barriers and challenges as an educator can impact us to some extent. For many of us, after failed attempts at, unsuccessfully collaborating with some of our families on behalf of students, some of our own thoughts and ideas about the families of our students could begin to shift. And so, because we are aware of our own efforts and energy in reaching out to families, we may not always keep at the forefront some of the things that our families are going through when trying to engage with us. And so the information we may hold about them could be very inaccurate. And because of these inaccurate thoughts, that we have about our families, it could manifest into it could manifest in our interactions that we have and carry out with our families when we're trying to engage with them. And so this is going to lead us to have a conversation about archetypes. And so to make sure that we're all on the same page, one is to define what is an archetype. And so an archetype is the original model from which something is developed or made. A very typical example of a certain person or thing. And so right now, I want you to think about what is your archetype of how family members should support their students. And so while you're thinking about this, I would love to share with you some of my own archetypes about how family members should support their students. And so when I consider my ideal family member, archetype or support, someone that comes to mind is Claire Huxtable, right? And so growing up, I watched the Cosby Show, and Claire Huxtable was a very, very important role within her family. And so when I'm thinking about the type of support she provided, it was very much so one that was intentional, teaching her children to advocate for themselves, to speak up and to be honest and truthful. She's just very vocal. When I think about a non-family member support that comes to mind, it would be kind of like, a character from Mean Girls. If anyone knows, there's been a reboot of Mean Girls since I saw it maybe 15 or 20 years ago. But the mother of Regina George. And so when I'm considering my archetype of a family member that's not super supportive, she comes to mind. The fact that, it was more about like social hour at her house and not doing homework and not encouraging academics, but maybe social aspects of high school. And so I have my own archetypes of what I think a supportive family member should look and sound like. I'd like you all to take a moment to do the same. So on your computer somewhere, or maybe on a sheet of paper, I would like you to jot down, what is your archetype of how an ideal family member supports their student? List some characteristics that come to mind. Then I'd like you to do the same thing for a non-ideal family member support. What is your archetype of how a non-ideal family member supports their student? And list some characteristics that come to mind. Go ahead and take a solid minute, and then we're going to come back together. Take about 30 more seconds to consider your archetypes of ideal or non-ideal supports, and list the characteristics that come to mind for each. And so for me, when I'm considering my archetypes for family members that show up in ways, that aligns to how I think that they should be, I noticed that I was much more invested in these families versus the families that I engaged with that did not, or that did fit my archetypes of non-ideal supports. I noticed that sometimes I didn't always show up, or I wasn't always as invested in them because they aligned to my archetypes of, not ideally supporting their students. And so that's going to be something that we should really pay attention to. And it's going to lead us to this reflection question. So I want you to consider what was illuminated for you as you thought or you think through your own archetypes. How might understanding your archetypes influence or impact your engagement with families or communities? Feel free to jot that down somewhere, or you can drop it in the chat. How might understanding your archetypes influence or impact your engagement with families or communities? And so thank you for taking some time to consider some of your archetypes and reflect on your archetypes and thinking through and taking a moment to either jot that down and reflect or share. And so when you think about characteristics of the families that you're working with, on behalf of, serving our students, there's some things that I'd like us to keep in mind. And so each of us has our own perception of ideal families and how we think they should support their students. And our archetypes manifest in our interactions with our families. And our perception of our families impacts and influences our expectations of how we believe they should support their child and how we engage with them. And so, regardless of the role that we hold, the beliefs and archetypes that we have about the families of our students and how we should engage with them will impact what we do and what we try. And so it doesn't matter what type of family member is attached to our student. What matters most is that we value and hold each of them. And so it's going to be really, really important that we work to push past barriers to engage with each of our families in the ways that are going to best support them, excuse me, and their student. And so keeping that on the forefront of our mind, I'd like us to consider this. Parents' involvement in their children's education is widely understood as a key component of educational success. However, school system, the school system in ways consistent with However, schools typically expect parents to engage with the school system in ways consistent with white middle-class parenting and behavioral norms, and in ways that are differential to the school's agenda. And so, as we, as we acknowledge some of the archetypes we have about our families and how we believe they should engage, it's going to be important for us to understand a few things. First is that, dominant models of parent involvement are going to be based on the behavioral norms and values of white middle-class families. And so most educators base expectations for parent involvement on very specific acts of engagement, such as helping children with their homework or volunteering at a school-sponsored event, or maybe attending parent-teacher conferences. And so in much of the parent engagement research, there has been an underlying assumption that all parents are the same. And when there is this type of assumption, there's a failure to acknowledge the very unique experiences that many families of color have. And so there is a disconnect often between lower income parents and families of color and schools. And this can be heightened by a lack of racial and cultural synchronization between parents of color and schools, when these families may fail to code switch or culture switch to the dominant white middle class type personnel. And so I think it's really important for us to note that racial and cultural disconnects, or another way to say it is this incapability between the home and school cultures, are going to produce some challenges for our students, for parents, and for even school personnel, as many of us experience. And so when we're considering, all of these things, I want us to think about, where do our beliefs and our values come from of what is correct or incorrect when it comes to engaging and collaborating with families. And so that is going to lead us to the cycle of socialization. And so this is a tool that we often use, and it's called the cycle of socialization. And so essentially, we are born into this world with a clean slate. There are no isms, excuse me, there are no biases, there are no stereotypes, and it's just us. And so this is a real picture of yours truly. I didn't want much in life, just food. And so I'm pretty sure that in this picture, that is what I was trying to communicate to my mother. Okay. And so the first part of the cycle is birth. The next part of the cycle is called culturalization. And so this is where shaping of our expectations and norms, and we're taught, different beliefs and practices by those who are closest to us. And so this is a photo of my mother. And when I think about my mother, she was very vocal and very, very direct and really very present for my learning, even if she wasn't always around. And so my mom was often at work when I was at school. When I got out of school, sometimes she worked at night. But what I know to be true is that my mom always placed emphasis on learning because that was something that was very important to her. And she really respected all of those who were in positions of teaching, if I'm going to be quite honest. And so the next part of the cycle after culturalization is institutionalization. Okay. And so this is where our beliefs and practices are reinforced by institutions, places like school or places of worship. This could be the legal system, also, the media, social media included. And so when I'm thinking about, some of the things that my mom taught me that carried through in other parts of my institutionalization was this whole idea of having, touch points with my teachers. So my mom always outwardly, showed concern for my learning. So even when I was at church, she would follow up with my Sunday school teacher or my youth pastor. At school, she would always have touch points with some of my teachers or my after school care providers, even my babysitters, right? For what I was learning and if I needed help or if there was something she could do. And so when I would watch television, when I'm thinking about like my archetypes, I think about, characters like Claire Huxtable. And in my mind, she would also check up on her children and their academics and other spaces of their lives. And so that is definitely something that my mom did often. And so you'll see a picture. This is a picture of my elementary school, actually in Georgia. And then finally, we get to the part of the cycle called enforcement. Okay. And so enforcement is where some of our beliefs and practices that we are taught are rewarded or punished, stigmatized, privileged, or persecuted. And so when I'm considering my own upbringing, I feel like our family, especially when I became a teacher, this is a picture of me with a couple of my students. But when I'm thinking about this idea of reinforcement of a behavior or practice, when it came to families, when I was a teacher, families that were super invested in certain ways that aligned to my own archetypes or that of my school, I noticed that they were held in very high regard. They were always spoken really, really highly of. They were always thought of for different resources or opportunities or experiences. Whereas the families who were not always involved in certain ways that aligned with, educator archetypes, they weren't always spoken very highly of. Sometimes they weren't always, reached out to by school personnel for different resources or opportunities. Um, and so I noticed that there were some, I guess archetypes, if you will, that families matched and they were rewarded because they aligned versus those who were not given as much as they could have been given because they did not show up in ways that the system thought that they should. And so as an educator, this leads me to think about or consider, what are the beliefs that I would like to perpetuate or disrupt? You see that at the very, very top. As a teacher, did I want to continue to, engage more more consistently with those who align to my archetypes or not. And so this is going to lead us to a reflection question that I'd like you to consider. What were you socialized to believe was the role families play in their students' educational experience? And I'd love for you to just take a moment, jot this down somewhere. We're going to take a full minute for you to consider what you were socialized to believe that the roles family play in their students' educational experience. And so feel free to use the 4 stages of the cycle of socialization to answer this question. And so I'll go back to the cycle, but what were you socialized to believe was the role families play in their students' educational experience? Go ahead and take 1 minute and walk it through the cycle. Take about 20 more seconds to finish some of your. And so if you weren't able to completely finish all 4 stages of the cycle of socialization, I do encourage you to come back to it and to really think about what you were socialized to believe. And so that is going to bring us to our next part of the session, talking through the continuum. And so this is the family engagement continuum. And there are 3 levels to this continuum. And so the first level is family involvement. And this is going to be more of a one-way direction in a relationship. And so it could look or sound like, the school and staff only making requests to families that might pertain to a student's classroom and or school environment. The next level is family engagement, okay? And so this is going to be a 2-direction relationship. And so families are going to have more involvement in the decision-making process as it pertains to their students' classroom and or school environment. The last level is going to be family partnership, okay? Families are deeply connected in a continuous and reciprocal relationships. And so families are going to be intimately engaged in the decision-making and roles in the classroom, the school, and the district. And so, as we see with family involvement, there's going to be one-way communication with families, okay? It is just us sharing with families how to be involved and directing them. But then we have family engagement, which consists of a 2-way communication. And so this is going to be a much more meaningful collaboration between family and, the school or the educator. And when we're considering engagement in comparison to family partnership, not only is there 2-way communication, but the school and or educator recognizes the role that families play in their students' lives, and they share responsibility for their students' learning and development alongside one another. And so, given the differences at each level, I'd like you to think about collaboration with families in a different way, okay? And so, when we have family involvement, I'd like you to consider this level of involvement, seeing families as stakeholders, right? And so, a stakeholder is a person with an interest or a concern in something. And so stakeholders are only going to require pertinent updates regarding services or a project or products. Then there's family engagement, right, which is the next level. I'd like you to consider families on this level. They would be considered like more like clients, okay? And so a client is a person that's using the service of other professional persons or company. And so a client is going to require that you collect their input and feedback on the product or service being provided. So when you're thinking about family engagement, I want you to consider families through the lens of seeing them as clients. But lastly, for family partnership, okay, we're seeing families as a partner on this level. And so a partner is going to be a pair of people engaged together in the same activity. And so partners are going to require that you co-create and deliver the services and products together. And so these are three different lenses we could use to consider our families at each level. Involvement, considering families as stakeholders, family engagement, considering or viewing families as clients, or family partnership, where we're really considering and viewing families as partners in this work with us. And so I want you to consider where you placed your own practice or your educational ecosystem, where it consistently operates on the continuum. Where does your practice or educational ecosystems practice currently fall on the continuum once you consider this new lens of viewing family? Take a moment. And so hopefully from what we've gone over thus far, you have even more of an understanding holistically of where your practice or your school's ecosystem, where that currently lies in your operation with families. And so to give you just an example, progressing through the continuum, I want to share this example with you. If I have just received funding to support families that I serve through my organization, and I wanted to consider, okay, well, where does my practice fall with my collaboration with families on the continuum? An example of my practice on the involvement level could look like after receiving the funding for my organization, me sending an email via listserv to all of the families to all of my families, letting them know that I received a grant and how funds will be allocated to support them. So that would be the first level. If I wanted to really engage families a little bit more in practice, once I received these funds, it could look like sending them a questionnaire with options on how the funds could be allocated to support and serve them. And then when I'm considering receiving these funds and I want to know what could this look like in my practice and really partnering with my families in this example, it could look like me meeting with families. So maybe this could mean me making phone calls or meeting with my families in person or virtually to learn about, some of the services that would best support them and share a process for determining how funds could be used given their feedback and given their needs. And so that is just an example of a practice and what it could look like on each level going on of the continuum, going from involvement to partnership. And so before we get into some strategies, there are some key ideas that I'd like to make sure we're walking away with. Increasing family engagement requires intentionality, adaptability, and exploration. And so during this session, we've already begun to kind of explore our own archetypes of how we believe families should support or should not support their students. We've gone through the cycle of socialization to consider where some of our beliefs and practices come from, and if we want to perpetuate or disrupt them. And so, as we're moving forward, I'd also like us to remember that Many of our families face challenges and barriers that we, being a part of schools, may not always consider in our engagement with them. And so it's going to be really, really important for us to acknowledge and evaluate ways for us to shift our own mindsets and behaviors in order to meet our families where they are, because that's truly going to be invaluable. And lastly, I hope that we would each seek feedback and explore new systems and structures to address any of the current barriers for engaging and interacting with our families. And so that's going to lead us to this last portion of our webinar today, increasing engagement with families. And so what I'm going to be sharing with you is some information that we found from Washington Office of Superintendents of Public Instruction. And so they created this entire family engagement and guidance toolkit. And within this toolkit are the 5 categories for increasing family engagement. These categories include sharing, planning, and decision-making, strengthening relationships, supporting learning at home, effective communication, and community partnerships. And so you're going to have an opportunity after we walk through an example of one of the categories, and you're going to have an opportunity to kind of explore which category that you think would be most helpful in your collaboration and working with families. And so we're going to take a look at one area or one category. This category is called strengthening relationships. And so there are some outcomes that will be true and an impact that will happen if we are able to strengthen relationships with families. Under outcomes, families' existing knowledge, skills, and forms of engagement will be honored and recognized. A welcoming and sustaining environment will exist that promotes family engagement, and families will have the ability to support and select educational options for their children. And so the impact of strengthening relationships means that there will be meaningful, authentic relationships that are going to be built between families, school staff, building the capacity of each other to better support students. Inclusive, equitable school policies, practices, and programs build welcoming culture of inclusion and belonging for all families that reflects and respects the diverse school community. And so, what could an example of strengthening relationships be moving throughout the 3 levels of the continuum? So let's look at an example. Informing parents of options to connect with other parents. That could look like us involving families. On the next level, family engagement could look like developing videos and providing video conference to support and to help families access curriculum, assessments, and achievement goals. Then family partnership could look like putting a process in place to gather feedback in multiple formats from families to ensure that teachers can assess the preferred communication methods that are appropriate for their families. Okay, so that is just an example of a way to build relationships through the continuum, starting from family involvement, hitting family engagement, and then going to family partnership. And so now is some time for exploration. And so this is what we're going to do. In a few moments, I'm going to drop a link in the chat. And when I drop this link in the chat, you're going to have access to a folder. Within that family engagement folder, there are going to be 2 other folders you can insert yourself. So you can go into ECE elementary, or the other option is secondary, which consists of middle school and high school. Within this folder, for both of those grade levels, you're going to see the toolkit that I just referenced that has the 5 categories of family engagement. What I'd like you to do is you're going to answer these 2 reflection questions. Which of the 5 categories will you intentionally focus on to better support your students and engage families? And also, what are 1 to 2 things you and or your team could implement within that category to increase family or community engagement? And so, again, I am dropping that link in the chat. You're going to be able to peruse through, and you'll see the 5 categories for increasing family engagement. And you'll also see other examples of ways to take some of your practices from the lowest level to the highest level on the continuum. So going from, very little or no contact and interaction to higher impact involvement. And so you will see that in the chat, and you'll be able to answer this reflection question. And so I want to encourage you all, feel free, you'll have access to that link after this webinar ends, but feel free to come back to it to figure out ways that you and your team could increase your family engagement. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for this informative session, Ms. Thomas. If you would like to inquire more about our services and see how the Equity Assistance Center South can help, please visit us at www.exsouth.org, or you can send us an email at exsouth@southerneducation.org. We will love your feedback on today's session, and so you will see a QR code that is on the screen where you can provide your feedback, and we have also put a survey link in the chat and will love your input. Also, we will send a follow-up email along with today's survey, this webinar, and additional resources that will be attached. You will also see the bibliography page that was before this slide. Thank you again for joining us. We truly appreciate your time, and you have a great day.